listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you, and welcome to The Briefing. There's a new Aussie sport taking the internet by storm and getting some experts fired up.
It's designed basically to exploit the most violent aspects of our contact sport. So essentially have two very big blokes running at each other to cause a concussion.
That deep dive looking into the world of Run It Straight is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru this Wednesday, the 7th of May.
Morning, Tara, and morning to you listening. We're starting today with all things Aussie politics, where the fallout continues following Labor's landslide election win over the weekend. Top officials in the Liberal Party yesterday admitted the party's moved too far away from its core principles, with one saying they're failing to reach multicultural Australia.
We weren't able to, in many ways, to connect with the Muslim vote in outer Western Sydney. We weren't able to connect with some of the Chinese votes, some of the Sikh vote, some of the Indian vote. We are a multicultural country now, and we need to make sure that our party is reflective of all Australians. I think this election says that we are not.
The party's Vice President Fiona Scott speaking on Sky there.
Yeah, and her comments come as pressure is also mounting for the Liberal Party to introduce a gender quota to see more women elected to the party, and that's after being accused of having a women issue, and that's something that the state Libs in WA say they're actually looking at following their huge defeat back in March. But not all federal Libs are on board, including Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, who has labelled the suggestion a knee-jerk reaction. She says women deserve to be elected because of their merit rather than simply for being a woman.
And look, the Libs aren't the only ones grappling with losses from election night. Departing Greens MP Max Chandler-Mather, who lost his inner-city Brisbane seat to Labor on Saturday, spoke to the ABC yesterday saying while he was proud of his work in Parliament, he feels he's let people down, and he actually described his loss as somewhat bittersweet.
Parliament is a sick place, can I just say. In terms of a workplace, it was bloody awful. Basically, half the Labor front bench was there in Parliament, just screaming at me. And I was just getting up there saying there should be caps on rent increases. And I remember walking back into my office and almost throwing up out of stress.
Yeah, wow. I mean, our politicians certainly cop it both in the workplace, from the public and online. And look, just while we're on politics, a quick update on the seat count in the House of Reps. Labor's now sitting on 92 seats, which is massive, and the coalition are on 42. The Greens still have no seats officially, but it is looking possible that their leader, Adam Bandt, who's locked in a tight contest with the Labor candidate, could retain his Melbourne seat.
Just a heads up, this next story discusses some distressing details relating to children. Forensic police will finish their examinations of a country New South Wales home today, where the bodies of two young boys were found on Monday. Police say the 6 and 7-year-old boys didn't turn up to school, prompting a police welfare check at their Coonabarabran home. Upon arrival, officers found the boys dead and arrested the pair's 66-year-old grandmother, who had been caring for them after they'd been taken from their parents and put into state care.
She's since been arrested and temporarily taken to a mental health facility in Orange and is likely to be slapped with double murder charges upon her release into police custody. Assistant Commissioner Andrew Holland says the boys' parents have been informed and they, the police and the wider community are devastated.
A death in a small community has an impact on the whole community. The death of two young innocent boys has a major impact. Let's just say that she did try to self-harm in a way that was obviously to take her and the children out.
Officers who attended the scene are being offered counselling due to its confronting nature, and a post-mortem examination will be conducted tomorrow to confirm the boys' cause of death.
Changing pace now and to the US, where Donald Trump has met with Canada's newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House. Any guesses, Tara, what might have been on the agenda?
Hockey? Maple syrup? No. Knowing Trump, it's got to be tariffs.
Maybe. Let's have a little listen.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
Never say never. Ever say never.
Oh, God, yes. So that was the Canadian PM there gently reminding the leader of the free world that Canada is not for sale and will not become the 51st state of the US despite Donald Trump's best efforts.
Yeah, and look, the meeting in its entirety was actually surprisingly chill. Trump saying that it was an honour to host Carney returning the flattery by calling him a transformational president. But the charm was not enough to get Trump to suspend the tariffs that he's imposed on Canada for now.
Yeah, and speaking of tariffs and Trump, a little update on that 100% tariff he wants to whack on all films made outside the US. Aussies have bitten back, including the government and the local film industry. The Minister for Arts, Tony Burke, saying he and the CEO of Screen Australia are monitoring this situation closely, assuring Australians they will be standing up unequivocally for the rights of the Australian screen industry.
Footy fans, this one is for you. The deal is done. The NRL will get an 18th team from 2027, the Perth Bears.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! The ARL Commission signed the dotted line with the WA government to launch the West Coast side after months of negotiations.
ARL boss Peter V'landys and the NRL's chief exec are flying to Western Australia today to make a formal announcement about the new team tomorrow. So watch this space. Possible coaches to lead the side have also been swirling, with South's legend Sam Burgess already putting his hand up for the job, and former Eels coach Brad Arthur also among the names being thrown around.
Meanwhile, there's also talks about a possible 19th team to join the league by 2028, with sights set on Papua New Guinea.
And we are just 1 week away from the Eurovision Song Contest kicking off in Basel, Switzerland. Semi-final 1 will start nice and early at 5 a.m. next Wednesday for us here down under. But if you want to catch Australia's performance, tune in to the second semi-final on Friday morning, where you can witness Gojo in action.
They drink my milk all across the land. I can tell you want a taste of the milkshake, man.
The WA artist, most known for his viral TikToks, is taking to the stage next week as Australia celebrates 10 years of competing in the competition.
I hope I don't get hate for this, Chris, but I have to ask, you're a massive Eurovision fan. How on earth do they pick the people that represent the country? Because, I mean, okay, some of them are just a little bit left field, a little bit wacky.
I love how you're dancing around this. Look, I will say this. There is an internal panel. It does involve people from SBS. It involves people who are heavily involved in the music industry here in Australia, and they go through the candidates and they see who's up. Look, I will say this about Gojo. He is up there as one of our kookiest acts. We have had kookier. Let's not forget, we had Kate Miller-Heidke shooting herself up in the air on this weird little pogo stick flying around singing Zero Gravity, all right? We have had weird things before.
Yeah.
But I will say the song is kind of good. It's co-written by Shepherd. Everyone loves Shepherd in Australia. We're in with a pretty good shot this year. We really are.
Yeah, that's what I mean. People know Shepherd. People know Kate Miller-Heidke. Anyway, look, it just reminds me, maybe I'm triggered because it reminds me of the year that Lordi represented Finland, and my family's from Finland, and they were horrified that the only time Finland wins Eurovision, it was this heavy metal band that dressed up as real-world demons and won singing a song called Hard Rock Hallelujah.
Hard rock, hallelujah. Hard rock, hallelujah.
Oh,
and can I just say, Tara Cassidy, that was such a well-deserved victory. That is exactly what Eurovision is about. Eurovision is about the left-of-field choices, the weird, the wacky, the fresh, the unique. How many more descriptors can I do to get you over the line? Come on, Tara, you will be tuning in next Wednesday and Friday with me, surely.
Yeah, look, if it's about the weird and unique, then absolutely, that's what they do. I'll give you that. I'll tune in. Now, look, that brings our headlines to a close for today. Next up is My Deep Dive, taking a look at a sport that has gone viral, but now is raising concerns from some experts who are worried about how dangerous it is. Listen to that up next.
Rules of the game are simple. With a run zone of 10 metres, one player carries the ball and the other defends. So how do you win? You win by dominating contact 4 rounds to impress the judges. Hit hard, stand your ground, and inflict damage.
Welcome to the world of Run It Straight, the self-dubbed world's fiercest collision sport, which has taken social media by storm for its massive hits and knockouts.
Oh, he's not looking good down there, but that was a serious collision.
Now an official league has started here in Australia, even holding its first ever championship in recent days in Melbourne, including a hefty cash prize, celebrity rugby star clash, big crowd, and even bigger blows.
Runner ready! Defender ready! 3, 2, 1, run it!
And here we go first.
Round 1, run 1, and Canberra's Curtis Malataisi is down. Then, on to round 2.
Oh, yeah! Hit all of it!
Melbourne's Troy Pulapaki is out cold and out of the competition.
But now the competition has drawn criticism from some concerned health experts who say the colossal collisions carry even greater risks. Dr Alan Pearce is a neurophysiologist who specialises in the brain and sport-related concussion. He joins me now. Alan, we've got the Run It Straight Challenge, now the Run It Championship League, which is only growing in popularity, and often because of these massive tackles, which sometimes are even knocking people out to the point of concussion, as we saw in this competition in recent days. What do you think about it?
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm going to try and control my rage and ranting as much as possible, but it's a very concerning activity. I really struggle to call it a sport. It's designed basically to exploit the most violent aspects of our contact sport, so in particular rugby, by just taking the element of the collision and actually designing the sport to essentially have two very big blokes running at each other to cause a concussion. And that is one of the ways that you can actually win your bout. So I'm very concerned.
Why is it concerning you so much? What happens to the brain when someone gets concussed?
It's really flying in the face of nearly 100 years of research. So, you know, we know from the combat sports like boxing that repeated impacts or repeated blows to the brain can cause pathological damage down the track. And it's this accumulation of repeated blows that, leads to brain diseases like dementia, motor neuron disease, Parkinson's disease, and now more recently, chronic traumatic encephalopathy or CTE that we are seeing in the rugby and football players. So what we see is that when two people are really running as hard as they can at each other, you don't have to have a direct hit to the head for the brain to continue moving. And the brain's a very delicate tissue. It sounds a little bit awful to say, Tara, but if I opened up your head and I took your brain out, I could squeeze the tissue through my fingers. And so it's a very delicate tissue. And so when you get massive hits, the brain tissue moves and it stretches and it shears the brain cells. But also in these sort of collision events, you get a acceleration and a deceleration. So think about being in a car crash and you're wearing a seatbelt. You hit another car, you still keep moving forward and then you move backwards. So, there's the potential for quite a bit of damage to the brain in these sort of events.
And what are some of the impacts more short term from getting a concussion or even just a head knock? Like you mentioned that you don't necessarily need to be concussed for there to be actual damage done.
If we look at concussion first, we have to understand that concussion is a brain injury. I have people in my research program with one concussion who have taken 6, 12, 18 months to recover. Some are 2, 3 years still not recovered. It affects their work. It affects their activities of daily living. It affects their relationships. It causes mental health issues, cognitive impairments. So, that's some of the concerns that we see from, one concussion. But, this repeated trauma, where you don't necessarily have any concussion symptoms can, affect the brain over a long period of time. And this is what we're seeing with the risk of CTE, is this repetitive impacts. And if you had watched the event either there or online, you would have seen that these guys are running at each other, multiple times. And if you think about this, and they go to another event and they go to another event, plus all their background in rugby, it builds up.
And you were talking about CTE there, which has long been linked to quite severe mental illness and even deaths among athletes, both in the US, often linked to the NFL, and here in Australia it's been linked to rugby and AFL. We saw former Adelaide Crows player Heather Anderson was one of the first female athletes to be diagnosed with it, which they only found out after her death by suicide. We obviously saw a similar scenario with Paul Green. Do you think that people still, despite hearing about CTE and the dangers of concussions, don't take this seriously enough?
Oh, 100%. There's, we are still battling to try and get people to fully understand what the risks are long term. For disclosure, I'm part of the Australian Sports Brain Bank that, we diagnosed Heather Anderson, Paul Green, Shane Tuck, Danny Frawley, post-mortem, and found, that, this is a brain disease. And one of the things that we have to understand is that CTE you do have mental illness associated with it, but it's not a mental health condition. It's a brain disease. And the simplistic way of describing CTE is that it's a dementia. And when people hear that it's a dementia, a form of dementia, then they understand that it's more than just, depression or anxiety. This is a very serious mental illness, and it does come through exposure. And so people don't fully understand or appreciate the accumulation of the exposure of these hits. It's almost like the analogy is sunbaking. And we used to go out into the sun every weekend for hours on end, and then only 30 years or 40 years later regret the decision because we're now struggling with melanomas. So it's a very similar outcome that at the time it doesn't necessarily make a huge impact, and so people underestimate what the issues are. But people in their 30s and 40s or 50s then start to have things go wrong and don't understand why. Some will have memory loss, others will have anger and irritability, others might have some movement disorders, others will have some psychiatric changes. So it's very difficult for us to sort of pinpoint it down, other than the fact that it could be any of these things associated with a history of repetitive collision trauma or physical trauma.
And is there any way to actually try and play these sports without removing the contact, the part that people like? Does head protection gear actually make any difference?
No, it's one of the big myths around this, that we've got decades of research that helmets have no protective effect at all for the brain. So, I'm not anti-helmet. I cycle, and I'll wear a helmet where I cycle, irrespective of the laws, because we know that helmets will protect the skull bone from fractures and lacerations, but it doesn't stop the brain tissue from moving inside the skull. And so helmets are not necessarily a mitigating way of reducing concussion or even head trauma risk. What we're trying to do, and this is colleagues of around the world, we are trying to educate people that we might need to think about modifying sports for our children and young adolescents, because then we can reduce the exposure risk from maybe 8 to 10 years. You mentioned Heather Anderson, but there's others as well. She started full contact rugby and Australian rules football at 5 or 6 years of age. And so what we need to do is try and reduce that and let kids play these sports in a non-contact version, so they still get to learn the skills of running and agility and evading an opponent and passing the ball and throwing the ball or kicking, but just without the unnecessary contact until the age of 14, where we can start to teach kids how to tackle properly, how to roll, how to be tackled in a controlled environment, so that they can then play these games at the full version without actually affecting the sport for adults.
And it's not limited to kind of rugby and this particular type of challenge. Like, we've seen people's favourite sports, there's been gladiator-style competitions, WWE, boxing, UFC, rugby, often the rougher the better for spectators. How do we balance our love of this type of sport with looking after the players who are ultimately paying the price?
there have been suggestions on trying to modify training practices so we don't have full contacts in too many training practices. We're not saying that you should not to have contact in all training, but in the UK, for example, with rugby, they're now limiting contact training to 15 minutes per week. And that's come from some of the science that has shown that players are less fatigued when they come into game day. So we have evidence to show that this is actually a better thing for athletes, but also a better spectacle for the crowd because the players are playing, more optimally than they would be when they traditionally were going into matches, fatigued. So we also need to think about, if a player is concussed, that they have a longer period time out. So, we need to consider the 11 days in rugby, 12 days in AFL. I think depending on the region of Australia, boxing has anywhere between 30 and 90 days rest period. So, we do need to think about that in order for athletes to have longer and better career spans as well. We see too many athletes retiring at 20, 21 years of age in tears because they've had too many impacts to the brain.
Certainly something that people or their kids need to take into consideration when taking part in these sports. Alan, thank you so much for your insight and thank you so much for joining me on the briefing today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
That was brain and concussion expert Dr Alan Pearce speaking with me there about the risk of the new viral sport Run It and the dangers of concussion. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go though, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone who you think might find it interesting. Or you can also check out our socials at The Briefing Podcast on Instagram and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.
Listener.